Monica Roy, she was at Michigan, along with her, the man she ultimately married, Paul Roy. And Monica wrote me a, at the time, handwritten letter encouraging me to come to Michigan. And I decided to come to Michigan because of that letter, partly. Classes that I probably liked better than others was torts. I thought was good. Civil procedure, not so much, although Professor Cooper taught that class. Property to this day, no property. But yeah, no, I didn't have issues with in terms of like belonging or in terms of how I viewed my place in class or in terms of classes. So when I went to Michigan, and maybe this is true of all law schools, it didn't occur to me that it would be competitive. So, they had various phrases for people who were like, teacher, call on me sort of thing. The one thing I didn't like about law school, I didn't like being called on because, I was concerned that I wouldn't know the answer. But you had in our classes, you had all these mostly men constantly raising their hand and trying to
it's still
impress the teacher. It's still like that, right? And then they were constantly talking about their grades and what'd you say on the test. And I learned very quickly, never, ever, ever discuss an exam after you left the exam, because those people, they don't know the answer. And, once you got into a discussion with them, you'd end up worrying yourself to death about what you said.
Right.
And they could have gotten it totally wrong. So it was just different. It felt extremely competitive, and I didn't realize it actually was competitive. You actually did have to be concerned about your grades, but no one said that to me because remember, no one I knew had gone to law school. When I went, there were 360 students in my class, and again, there was a summer session, and then there was the regular sessions. And at the time, there were 24 Black people, African Americans, and 12 men, 12 women. And I believe when I graduated, and I could be wrong about this, there were 5 women, 7 men.
Wow.
So go figure. But yeah, everyone was very supportive of everyone else. And I'm not just talking about the folks. I hung with a lot of different folks, not just, Carmen and Jarek and them. And although I did not have a study group, unlike other people, I did not have a study group for some strange reason. The people I met in law school are my lifelong friends. And we're still hanging out. What is it, 43 years later? And none of us have changed. Getting bigger. I've gotten shorter. But
have that plastic.
Yes. And that's what I appreciate. Literally lifelong friends who support each other every single day. Our ride and die friends. The other. We are literally ride and die.
I think this sense of belonging is a hard one to nail down because, one, I was a bit of an older student, so I wasn't looking for as much a sense of belonging. I had spent time overseas. I had lived by myself overseas for 3 years. I was pretty comfortable in my own skin, and maybe the desire to have football games and do other kinds of things on the diag or in the quad was not something that was as important to me. I was
Yeah.
still trying to pursue my interest in China and China-related activities. So I would often take an opportunity when there were events on campus related to China and speakers coming in from other universities to talk about China-related matters. I wanted to keep that intellectual interest, professional interest alive. So I was spending a fair amount of time doing that in the quote spare time that I had for doing things. So this sense of belonging, I think, was there through Balsa and through my relationships with other students.
Yeah.
But that was not as much a priority for me. And I understand how that could be a problem for someone who was 10 years my junior. I think there are probably more faculty now. I haven't been back to the law school in a few years, but I have had some contacts with law school students there, and I keep up with what's going on at the law school in terms of their faculty transition. And I do know that they're hiring more and more faculty, probably like a lot of the other tier 1 law schools that include race as a dynamic, that include critical race theory, that talk about interdisciplinary aspects of law and economics, law and women, for example, law and environment. Some of those things just weren't very well connected, at least when I was there in the 1980s. I was able to find people on campus, and I'm talking about the general campus community, not just the law school, because I had been there since 1970. I knew a lot of even faculty who were interested in politics, political events, current events, and I could go to them or go to graduate students who were writing PhDs on various subjects like Africa, for example, or China or Latin America, and what was going on in those particular regions, and even reconnect with some of my former graduate students who were from Ireland, and they could talk about what was going on in Ireland and their disconnect and issues that they had with the British government and those kinds of issues. But I think either because of time, as you and I both suggested, time constraints pose some restrictions. But there was not a sense that I had that many law school students that I encountered, Black, white, or otherwise, would in fact be spending a lot of times on political events and protest on campus if there were any. And there were some, because I was there when I was in graduate school. And Michigan has a very, very long history of protest, as we're seeing now with what's going on in Gaza. The Black law students as undergraduates shut down Michigan at some point because of the apartheid issues that were going on in South Africa. There were other issues that came up with anti-Vietnam and anti-war movements that were there. So there's a very rich history. Students for Democratic Societies had main offices at Michigan. It started at Michigan. The Michigan Daily was a viable and vibrant news media that students could have to art. That wasn't going on in the quad. I'm sorry. That's not going on at the law school. And I think, I don't know if the law school, if I'm cynical enough, at least to believe that if law schools wanted that kind of environment, they had both the resources and money to create that kind of environment. So I'm not so naive to say, well, law is just so encompassing. It's a jealous mistress. You have to focus on those things that are important to lawyers and potential clients. But that's okay. If that's true, then those are the outcomes that you're going to get.
Michigan I always got good grades, but Michigan was the first place that I ever went to school where I'd be sitting in a classroom and I'd look around and I knew I wasn't as intellectually gifted as half the class. I don't know where, I never felt like I was at the very, very bottom, but I had no visions of making law review and things like that. And so, but that didn't really affect my ability to be friendly with and friends with people. In fact, on this email chain, I think we have one or two people that were on law review and maybe somebody who was on journal. It just wasn't me. And I was okay with it because the number, didn't justify it. I mean, I even felt I wasn't on law review because somebody wasn't fair to me on my test. I mean, it wasn't it.
Right. You felt like it was fair.
Right. Well, I knew it was fair.
Yeah.
It was fair as it can be, yeah.
There were, again, opportunities through BALSA to meet second and third year students who were able to share their experiences. They also had a dinner called the Butch Carpenter event. And so I would go to that and use that as an opportunity to meet with other lawyers who were out in the field, as well as people typically who had graduated from Michigan. And there were lots of lectures also that were available in the law school where BALSA would invite speakers to come back to the school and talk to us as students about the challenges of being in law school, but also giving us hope, if you will, for what life was like after this experience of being in law school.
That's important.
And all of that is very important because at the time, as you full know, you're very focused. It's very much a tunnel vision about what you're studying and what your classes are like. And so the opportunities even to think and process things that are not related to law is very small. Definitely. But BALSA was very helpful in meeting those students and some of the younger lawyers who had graduated and were practicing law was important and helpful. BALSA certainly collaborated with other groups that were in the law school. There were event opportunities to talk with people who were other law students who were, like I said, probably second and third year students. I don't recall, other than the Butch Carpenter event, whether or not there were opportunities for me to participate in other on-campus events through BALSA. That may have been, again, because everybody that was in BALSA was a law student. So even though they may have been a second or third year student, they didn't have a whole lot of time. They certainly tried to organize speakers and events that would allow people to come in and speak to us and to the general law school community. But through, I think, no fault of their own, their time was pretty limited as well. I think most of my colleagues at the law school ended up being other minority students who were sharing similar experiences. I got involved in BALSA, the Black Law Student Association. I knew and met people who were in La Raza, which was the Hispanic or Latin law school association, and talked with them a lot about ways in which the law could impact minority communities and talk about the ways in which having a law degree and participating in legal affairs and going to seminars would be helpful post-graduate. But most of the time was spent in the library reading books and studying for classes and preparing for exams.
I really enjoyed it because and I really enjoyed it really because of the folks who were coming behind me. There was a guy who was like my vice president who succeeded me. His name was Broderick Johnson. And Broderick just a firebrand. I'm pretty calm. As Bahamians, we're pretty calm people. But he wasn't taking nothing off nobody. And BALSA really took off well beyond my years, in large part because of folks like him. But I enjoyed it. It was important to fight for those things for the students, the kind of resources they needed, the support they needed, and to give us a sense of belonging and have a sense of collegiality and collectiveness. So it was a great experience.
Well, one of the things that's probably different is the kind of law student that gets admitted. And by that, I mean that when I was there, the affirmative action criteria and standards were still in place so that the law school could use affirmative action motivations for getting minority students there. They could, obviously they had to look at LSATs, they had to look at your undergraduate, and in my case, graduate education. They would look at your extracurricular activities to see what other things you were involved in. But those were not the only criteria. And to the extent that you were actively involved in what would be considered social justice activities, then they could look at those and determine whether or not your interest in the law would take you in a particular path. And also, I think the other issue is that they would probably have some abilities to consider your urban environment. Did you go to private schools, for example?
Yeah.
And if you were, and this happened, I even was surprised and naive, I suppose, that there were even some Black students, not many, who had gone to private schools most of their career. So that was another disconnect that I found between my graduate school experience and my law school experience, that the law school student tended to come, even then, from a more traditionally elite environment. And I know that that's a term that has some pejorative meanings to it, but it means that their educational opportunities were greater. And I think the current law students now, and I've mentioned this to a few faculty members and discussed it with even some of my law school buddies and lawyer colleagues, that because of affirmative action now being eliminated as a criteria specifically at the law school, that therefore they are more required to rely upon traditional criteria for admission to law school. And if that's true, then the minority or Black person who comes to the university has got a high LSAT score, has done very well academically, has probably been involved in some extracurricular activities, but not as much required. And that student, especially if they are a minority, can go to Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, wherever you think are top tier law schools. Why would they come to Michigan? So Michigan then has the burden of trying to lure that particular elite, again, student who has the potential to go to any law school that is in the top tier. And so if they come to Michigan, they are a different kind of student, I think, than the students who were admitted when I was there as a law school student. And certainly before that, I have some colleagues who are, as you might imagine, a little younger than I am, but graduated from law school because they went through the traditional path and didn't get advanced degrees and all that. Many of them were much more active and involved in social justice and probably would raise some of those issues in the classroom. And while I haven't been in the classroom recently, I suspect there's less of that.
When I left Michigan, I had a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth, and I kind of almost said, I'll never give them a cent. And then, lo and behold, Dean Bollinger, I don't know if you know Dean Bollinger, you've ever heard of him, but he ultimately became the dean of the law school. He was so cool. He looked like this young surfer dude, he was like really cool. And he became the dean of the law school, and ultimately became the president of Michigan. And was one of the, and it was when Michigan, and one of the earlier affirmative action cases, you'll see it was Bollinger versus whatever. And once I saw him take the helm, I kind of lightened up and said, you know what, it's not, that may have just been a bad period. It's not the school. And luckily that Michigan was on the front lines trying to fight for, to keep, affirmative action, for example, and those other programs that allow people like me to get a chance. I was always a good student, and I could and one of the things that I firmly believe in is it wasn't a lie. It wasn't about being qualified or not qualified. It was just, did you get an opportunity? They had affirmative action in so many other ways, whether you were a legacy or this or your parents or whatever, and many of us didn't have those kind of opportunities. Schools were looking for talented minority students, right? I was actively recruited. A lot of my friends at Penn were similarly, they could have probably gone anywhere. And I thought I was actively recruited to go to Michigan as well. And one of the things I really liked about Michigan at the time, they had a program for students of color. I forget what it was called now. I wish I could remember. But they had tutorials, or you could go and get extra help with professors and things. They had some really young faculty, some younger faculty, kind of running that program, people that we could relate to. And then, and I'll never forget, in 1980, the 1980 election, Ronald Reagan got elected. Mm-hmm. And my best friend, who's now deceased, Bill Dixon, and I'll never forget, we're in the Lawyers Club going through dinner, and we could hear the many of our colleagues, some of our colleagues, I won't say many, some of our colleagues thinking, we got it, double R, that which they call Ronald Reagan, is getting elected. And then, the kind of the conservatism of the law school really kind of took hold. And the then dean, shortly after that, it seemed to us, those of us who were in Balsa, and I ultimately was a president of Balsa my third year, was trying to dismantle those support programs. I think it was called MAP. What was it called? MAP? Michigan. I can't remember the acronym, but that they were trying to dismantle the program. They were trying to take out those younger faculty members or senior law students who were helping us, and replace them with faculty members who were more senior, who really, in my opinion, just really didn't care. In fact, to this day, I still think the best blue book I ever wrote, I got the lowest grade. and I remember going to see the faculty member. It's my first year. And he said to me, he said, well, he said, that won't, he said, don't be discouraged. That shouldn't prevent you from being a good lawyer. And I remember saying to him, it won't. And I walked out. Mm-hmm. Never had him again. I never took him again. But I was really, really, really down on Michigan. And so, and I don't know if everybody like me felt it, but we had good people. I was there at a time when Valerie Jarrett was there. Oh, yeah. She was a third year. Valerie was like, she was just so calm, cool, and collected. Nothing really bothered her. But I really had a good experience, except for that.
Race didn't come up a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think about the traditional curricula, unless there were incidents that were defined in the case law where a particular plaintiff, defendant, appellee was a Black person or a person of non-majority status, that usually didn't come up. The only times that I remember race coming up specifically was in relation to the cases that we looked at in constitutional law. Okay. So Dred Scott case, for example, Brown versus Board of Education, those are sort of classic examples of circumstances where race and civil rights issues would come up. Interracial marriage would come up, of course, because of those cases. But normally race was not something that would be discussed by faculty or by the students. A lot of the classes that I ended up taking were pretty much leaning towards the corporate realm as well, commercial transactions, tax, and all that. And race is not going to be relevant in general for, outlining the tax code, for example. And L. Hart Wright talking about, various sections of the Internal Revenue Code. The faculty, I'm not suggesting that the faculty wasn't receptive to discussions about the law that interfaced with race, because our constitutional law professor was certainly prepared to do that. But in general, because of the way that law school professors generally get to become law school professors, which I didn't know at the time, is that they normally do well in law school, and they then go on to law review, and then they go on to faculty positions. So their focus is, in my view, pretty narrow in terms of overall presentation.
Yeah.
And that was a difficult or an observation that I would make even after I graduated from Michigan. There were very few lawyers that I met over the course of my 40 years now of practice where I could have discussions with lawyers about things that were both intellectual and non-legal. So we could talk about sports, we could talk about current events, we could talk about politics, we could talk about religion, but it's not as if the lawyers that I met and interacted with after the end of the day was over and we finished with our work and billable hours, we would go off and talk about books that they had read, or subjects that they were looking at, or other degrees that they held that they were interested in pursuing, or conferences that they went to that were providing them some intellectual stimulation that did not have to do at all with law.
Yeah.
And that remained a problem, and it remains a problem even now. I have probably a set of maybe 5 or 6 lawyers that I know who have that broad intellectual perspective about a lot of different subjects that are not related to law. The differences between probably the persons who are in law school now, who are minority students, and their white counterparts is probably less than it was before. Just because of the admission process and who is allowed to get through that window, they're not coming from very diverse economic backgrounds. But like I said, that's only a perception. I don't have any data to support that. But I do look at, data that is published nationally about Black student enrollment. And we've seen that Black law student enrollment at the major institutions that we're talking about has gone down, presents as a problem for Black alums from the law school, because just not to put too fine a point on it, but I've had some discussions with my colleagues who graduated from University of Michigan. And one of the things that we are all concerned about is, going back to the law school, because we did have mixed experiences there, but in general, certainly supported the abilities to be able to come out very skilled and knowledgeable and sharp about legal issues, and being able to be an advocate for our clients, and our various law firms that we went to accepted and appreciated the fact that we got accolades from being graduates from the University of Michigan Law School. So we'd want to give back to that institution, and yet financially, even though we're able to do that, the money has to go to an institution that you feel is doing the job that you want the institution to do. So while I continue to give money to University of Michigan LS&A programs and their graduate programs and to other things, I'm sometimes reluctant to make more of a contribution to the law school until I see that the law school Black enrollment has either leveled off or is starting to rise. And I'm not saying they haven't been trying to do that. I understand that that's a burden, but that does affect, I think, Black alum participation economically and in-person involvement with the university in their law school.
Half the students have to be Michigan residents, right? So when I went there, first year I was there, I had a roommate, and she'd gone to Michigan undergrad. And I'll never forget, her mother said to me, I'm moving, and her mother said to me, that her son who had gone to Michigan undergrad, hadn't been able to get into. Now her son's older than my roommate, obviously, had not been able to get into Michigan, right? Law school. And I couldn't figure out why she's telling me this particular story, because what does that have to do with me?
Right.
We're not in the same year. I didn't somehow take his space, his spot. And ironically, she was acting as if I had taken his spot, and that maybe the only reason why I had gotten in is because I was a Black, college grad from, like, say, Podunk U. But she was acting as if I'd gotten in. And I'm thinking to myself, I've thought this for years, half the people in the law school, 100 and, can't do the math, 180 people are from the state of Michigan. 180 people are from the rest of the world. The rest of the world. So the fact that your son didn't get in, and he did get into a good law school, well, he had a better chance than half the world. I mean, the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
But the reason I bring this up is because I think it made me mindful, as it always does, that some people think that you got in because of your race or your gender or something like that you have no control over.
Yeah.
And I always like to say, you want to believe that, you go ahead. I've never heard of a single case where somebody let you out based on your race or your gender. And so I'm bringing this up because I think that even though I was mindful of, my race and my gender back in the day in terms of people's perception about my getting into a particular school, I think Black students today have to be, I think they're even more aware than I was. I think that people are constantly talking about somehow, in some way, they think they have advantages, which they actually don't have. And I think maybe they're put in a position where they're constantly feeling like they have to explain why they are where they are. And I think everybody's more mindful of race and gender, and because of all the, the Supreme Court cases and the recent Supreme Court case, I just think it makes a difference. And I think I don't know, maybe it was easier. I feel like for me back in the day, and that's kind of sad. Right? I just think it was easier.